Can I ask you something? When was the last time you went a full week without hearing your child's voice? Not a missed call, not a short text, a full, silent week where nothing came through at all. I need you to sit with that feeling for a moment, because that is exactly where my story begins. My name is Gerald Whitmore. I am 68 years old. I spent 31 years as a pipefitter in Fort McMurray, Alberta, working the kind of jobs that age your hands before your face. My wife, Carol, passed from a stroke 6 years ago, and since then it has just been me in the house, on Birchwood Crescent, in Red Deer, me, the dog, and the particular silence that follows a man when the person who filled all his quiet spaces is suddenly gone. My daughter, Melissa, is 39. She lives in Calgary, about a 90-minute drive south. She has a daughter of her own, my granddaughter, Sophie, who just turned 8 in October. Sophie has her mother's dark brown eyes and her grandmother Carol's habit of tilting her head to the side when she is thinking hard about something. She is the kind of child who collects smooth stones from rivers and gives them names. She calls me Grandpa Jerry, and when she says it, I swear I stand 2 inches taller. Melissa got married 5 years ago to a man named Darren. I remember the first time she brought him to my house for Thanksgiving dinner. He drove a new black truck, wore a pressed shirt, and spent most of the meal talking about a real estate development project he was managing in Airdrie. He smiled often. He complimented Carol's china, even though Carol had been gone 2 years by then, and the china was mine to use as I pleased. Something about the way he corrected Melissa, mid-sentence, not loudly, not meanly, just quietly, like a small adjustment stayed with me. I mentioned it to my brother Dennis afterward. Dennis said I was being overprotective. Maybe I was. I let it go. The wedding was in July. Melissa looked beautiful. Sophie, who was 3 at the time, walked down the aisle holding a basket of white flowers and kept stopping to hand them directly to seated guests rather than dropping the petals on the floor. Everyone laughed. I had tears in my eyes for reasons I could not entirely explain. For the first couple of years, things seemed normal enough. I visited every 6 weeks or so. Melissa and I talked on the phone every Sunday morning. That was our standing routine since her mother passed. She would call around 9. We would talk while I made coffee, and she would tell me how Sophie's week had gone at school, what new book my granddaughter had decided she needed, how the weather in Calgary had been compared to Red Deer. Then somewhere around 2 years into the marriage, the Sunday calls started getting shorter. Then they started getting missed. She would text instead, "Sorry, Dad, busy morning, call you tonight," and then tonight would not come either. I told myself she was busy. She had a good job doing accounts management for a property firm, and Darren's development business had grown. They had bought a bigger house in a newer part of the city. People get busy, lives get full. I told myself that. But I noticed that when I did see her in person, she had changed in small ways I struggled to name. She laughed a little too quickly at things, Darren said. She checked her phone when he was in the other room in a way that felt less like curiosity and more like habit. Once, when I was helping Sophie build a puzzle in the living room, and Darren came home earlier than expected, I watched Melissa's posture shift. Not dramatically, just slightly, like someone who has learned to take up less space. I said nothing. I do not know why. Perhaps because I had no words for something I could not yet see clearly. Perhaps because I did not want to be wrong and cause damage I could not undo. I am telling you this now because I want you to understand the instinct was there from the beginning, and I chose not to trust it, and I have had to live with that choice every day since. The week that changed everything began on a Monday in February. A proper Alberta February cold that settles into the concrete, the kind of morning where your breath hangs in the air long after you have exhaled. I called Melissa at 9 as usual. It rang through to voicemail. I left a message saying hello, nothing urgent, just checking in. I figured she was in a meeting. By Wednesday I had called 3 more times and sent 2 texts. Nothing came back. I called her work number Thursday morning. The woman who answered told me Melissa had taken personal leave at the beginning of the week. She sounded professional and careful, the way people sound when they have been told not to say much. I sat in my kitchen for a long time after that call. Personal leave. Melissa had never mentioned she was taking time off. She always told me these things. Even in the periods when we were not talking as often, she told me the big things. Personal leave in February. No warning. No call. I thought about Darren. I thought about the way her posture had changed. I thought about the Sunday calls that had gotten shorter and shorter until they were almost nothing at all. I called Dennis. He listened. He said, "Drive down, Jerry. Just go." I left the next morning. The drive to Calgary takes about an hour and 40 minutes in clear conditions. I made it in just over 2 hours because of a stretch of ice on the highway south of Innisfail. The whole drive I kept telling myself there was a reasonable explanation. Medical appointment she had forgotten to mention. A surprise she was planning. Something simple that would make me feel foolish for worrying. I kept telling myself that right up until I pulled onto her street and saw the house. The driveway was empty, both vehicles gone. The blinds on the front windows were closed, which Melissa never did during the day. She loved natural light, always had, ever since she was a little girl. The recycling bin that should have been brought in 3 days ago was still sitting at the curb. There was a flyer stuck in the front door handle, the kind local businesses tuck in as they walk the neighborhood, and it was curled at the edges like it had been there for days. I sat in my truck for a moment, then I got out. I knocked. Nothing. I knocked again, louder. Still nothing. Melissa had given me a spare key years ago, back when she lived in her first apartment on McLeod Trail. I had carried it on my key ring ever since, without ever using it. I stood on her front porch in the February cold, and I looked at that key, and I thought about whether I had the right to use it. She was a grown woman. She had her own life. Maybe there was a simple explanation. Maybe I was overstepping. Then I thought about Sophie. 8 years old, dark brown eyes, grandmother's habit of tilting her head. Sophie, who names river stones and calls me Grandpa Jerry. I put the key in the lock. The house was cold inside. Not the cold of a furnace that had given out, but the particular cold of a space that has not been properly lived in for several days. The kind of cold that tells you the people who normally generate warmth in a house have not been doing so. The lights were all off. In the thin gray light from the closed blinds, I could see the kitchen counter, a coffee mug left on the edge, a cereal bowl still in the sink. Small things, but the kind of small things that tell you someone left in a hurry, or under circumstances they had not chosen. I walked slowly. My heart was doing something strange in my chest that I did not want to pay too much attention to. I called Melissa's name. My voice sounded too large in the quiet. Nothing answered. I went through the kitchen, down the hall, checked the master bedroom empty, bed made, but one of the closet doors was open, and a few things had been pulled from their hangers and left on the floor. Darren's side of the closet was neat. Melissa's side looked like something had been removed quickly. I stood there a moment, trying to understand what I was looking at. Then I heard it. It came from the direction of Sophie's room, a small, faint sound from behind a closed door, a rhythmic, soft tapping. Not loud, not desperate, patient. The sound of someone who had been making that sound for a long time and had settled into it the way you settle into breathing. I cannot tell you what I felt walking toward that door. I do not have words for it. I only know that my hand was not steady when I reached for the handle. Sophie's room was done in yellow and white. She had a bookshelf along one wall that Melissa had filled with everything from picture books to early chapter novels. Her small desk had drawings pinned above it, horses mostly, because Sophie had been obsessed with horses since she was 5. In the middle of all that ordinary, cheerful, little girl color, the closet door was slightly ajar, and from behind it came that faint, steady tapping. I crossed the room. I put my hand on the closet door. "Sophie?" The tapping stopped, a silence that lasted perhaps 2 seconds, but felt much longer. Then a voice, small, careful, hoarse in a way that told me she had not used it much recently, said, "Grandpa Jerry?" I opened the door. She was sitting on the floor of the closet in her winter pajamas, the blue ones with the small white snowflakes, wrapped in a fleece blanket that she had pulled from the shelf above her. She had a water bottle beside her, empty now, and a Ziploc bag with a few crackers remaining in it. Her hair was tangled. Her eyes were enormous and reddened. Her lips were dry and cracked. When the light from the room reached her face, she squinted and put her arm up. I dropped to my knees on the closet floor. I gathered her into my arms and I held her, and I did not let go for a long time. When I could speak, I pulled back just enough to look at her face. "Sophie, sweetheart, how long have you been in here?" She thought about it. 4 sleeps, she said. "I think 4. 4 days. My granddaughter had been alone in a closet in her house for 4 days. "Where is your mom?" I asked, though something in my chest already knew the answer was not going to be a good one. Sophie looked at me with those enormous eyes. "Mom said I had to wait here," she said. "She said if anything ever happened, I was supposed to go to the hiding spot and wait until someone who loved me came. She made me practice. She paused. She put snacks in. She said the snacks would last. Her voice was matter-of-fact in the terrible way children's voices get when they are trying to be brave about something they do not fully understand. I ran out yesterday. I picked her up, all 45 pounds of her, and I carried her out of that room, and I called 911 from the kitchen while I was getting her water and finding crackers in the pantry, and I did not put her down the entire time I was on that call. The police came in 16 minutes, paramedics 2 minutes after that. The paramedics said Sophie was dehydrated, but not critically so. They took her to Alberta Children's Hospital for observation. I rode in the ambulance with her. While we were at the hospital, I gave a statement to a detective named Sergeant Michelle Beaumont, a woman in her 40s, who had steady eyes and who listened the way very few people do without filling the silences. She told me what they had already begun to piece together. Melissa had been found. She was at Foothills Medical Center, 2 kilometers away, in the intensive care unit. She was alive. She had been found by a neighbor 2 days earlier, a retired schoolteacher named Mr. Kowalski, who lived next door and who had seen Darren loading luggage into his truck on the Sunday evening and had not seen Melissa since. He had knocked Monday morning to offer her his newspaper, as he sometimes did. When no one came to the door and he noticed the recycling bin still at the curb, he called non-emergency police. Officers did a welfare check and found Melissa at the base of the basement stairs. The official determination was blunt force trauma and delayed treatment. She had injuries consistent with a fall or a push and had been left. Darren was gone. His truck had been captured on highway cameras heading east on the Trans-Canada. He had cleared their joint bank account $43,000 on the Sunday afternoon before he left. I sat in a hospital chair between my daughter's ICU room and my granddaughter's pediatric ward room for 3 days. I drank coffee from the machine in the hallway. I talked to Sergeant Beaumont several times. I called Dennis, and he drove down from Red Deer and sat with me. What came out over the following weeks was this. Darren had been having an affair with a woman he had met through his development business, a woman named Tracy who lived in British Columbia. He had been planning to leave for at least a year. He had taken out a life insurance policy on Melissa 8 months earlier, $480,000. Melissa had not known about it. He had forged her signature on the application. He had also, we learned, been systematically isolating Melissa for over 2 years, monitoring her phone, controlling her access to money, making her feel, gradually and methodically, that she had no one to turn to and nowhere to go. This is why the Sunday calls had gotten shorter. This is why her posture had changed when he came home. This is why she had never told me. But she had told Sophie, not everything you do, not tell everything to an 8-year-old. But she had made a plan. She had practiced it with Sophie the way you practice a fire drill, calmly and matter-of-factly, so that if something ever happened, Sophie would know exactly what to do. Hide in the closet, stay quiet, wait for someone who loves you to come. Melissa had trusted that someone would come. I cannot speak to what it means that she trusted that. I can only tell you that I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of it. Darren Pollock was apprehended in Medicine Hat 6 days after the police issued a warrant. He had been heading for the U.S. border and had stopped to meet someone, a detail I will leave out. The arresting officers found cash and a prepaid phone in his vehicle. They found text messages to Tracy that were introduced as evidence at trial. The trial took place 11 months later in Calgary. I attended every session. Dennis drove down for the closing arguments and the verdict. Sophie stayed with Dennis's wife, Linda, in Red Deer. For those days she was 9 by then, doing well in school, seeing a counselor once a week whom she liked very much. The Crown prosecutor, a methodical young woman named Miss Chen, laid out the case in careful, documented sequence. The forged insurance policy, the financial control, the cleared bank account, the highway camera footage, the text messages, the medical evidence documenting Melissa's injuries, and the delay in treatment. The defense argued that Melissa's injuries were the result of an accidental fall, and that Darren had left in a panic, not with criminal intent. The jury did not find that persuasive. Darren Pollock was convicted of aggravated assault, causing bodily harm, fraud over $5,000, and attempted fraud regarding the insurance policy. He was sentenced to 14 years in a federal institution. The judge, in her sentencing remarks, used the phrase calculated, sustained cruelty, and I wrote those 3 words in the small notebook I had been carrying to every session, not because I needed them to remember, because I needed to be able to read them in my own handwriting at a later time, when things were hard, and know that a person in authority had seen clearly what had happened. Melissa spent 6 weeks in the hospital. She had a long rehabilitation. There was a period, I will be honest, when things were very dark, when the physical recovery was going forward, but something else in her was still in that house, on that basement floor, still in the years of being made smaller and quieter and less certain of herself. Those months were the hardest, harder than the trial, harder than the hospital. But she came through. She is not the same as she was before. I think she would tell you herself that she does not wish to be exactly the same as she was before, that she has learned things about her own strength that she could not have known any other way. She is back in Calgary now, in a smaller house, in a different neighborhood, closer to Sophie's school. She runs 3 times a week along the river pathway. She called me last Sunday at 9 o'clock exactly, and we talked while I made coffee, and she told me about Sophie's week at school, and the new book my granddaughter has decided she absolutely cannot live without. Sophie is 10 now. She still collects smooth river stones and gives them names. She is in a riding program on Saturdays because the horse obsession has only intensified. She asked me recently, with the directness that children have before life teaches them to soften their edges, whether I was sad that I had not come sooner. I told her the truth. Yes, I am sad about that every day. She thought about it, head tilted to the side just like her grandmother used to do. But you came, she said. That's the part that matters. I have been a pipefitter, a husband, a father, a widower, and a grandfather. I have worked with my hands in cold that would make a younger man quit. I have buried my wife, and I have sat at my daughter's hospital bedside, and I have held my granddaughter in a closet where she had been waiting for 4 days. I have sat in a courtroom and watched a man be held accountable for what he did to my family. And I have stood in a school gymnasium watching Sophie receive a reading award with her chin up and her dark eyes bright. And I want you to know that there is nothing in this world that comes close to that. If you are watching this, and you have a child or a grandchild whose calls have gotten shorter, whose laughter seems slightly off, whose posture has changed in ways you cannot name, please trust what you are sensing. Ask the question, even if you are afraid of overstepping. Drive down. Show up. The instinct that something is wrong exists for a reason, and the cost of ignoring it is something I would not wish on anyone. Coercive control is not always visible from the outside. It does not always leave marks that show. It works precisely because it is slow and quiet, and because the people it targets are made to feel that they have no one they can call without causing trouble. If someone you love seems to be shrinking, pulling back from conversations, from connections, from the version of themselves you have always known, that shrinking is worth your attention. In Canada, if you or someone you know is experiencing abuse, the Assaulted Women's Helpline and shelters across every province offer support regardless of the hour. You do not need to have all the answers before you reach out. You only need to reach out. Melissa did not tell me, because she had been taught, slowly and deliberately, that telling me would cause problems she could not manage. But she made a plan. She taught her daughter how to wait for someone who would come. She held on to the belief that someone would come, be the person who comes. I am Gerald Whitmore. I am 68 years old. I have a daughter who is still here, and a granddaughter who names her stones. And every Sunday morning at 9 o'clock my phone rings, and I pick it up before the second ring. I always will.